The planet Xara 7 was the kind of place where even hope suffocated. Mara Kessler had learned that the hard way. 6 months ago, she'd been dumped here, an exile left to die on a world so barren, so hostile, that it made even the most seasoned soldier shudder. The air was thin, poisoned by a toxic mix of gases that made every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. The soil was black and cracked, devoid of nutrients, a graveyard for the remnants of long-forgotten ships and shattered dreams. Mara was supposed to be one of those forgotten remnants. She paused, her boots grinding against the uneven surface as she scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just the same endless wasteland. No signs of life. No sound. The planet was as dead as it was supposed to be. The wreckage of her ship lay half buried a few hundred meters away, a silent tomb of twisted metal and burning memories. She had scavenged what she could, water filtration units, some rations that were barely edible, a few power cells, but the planet was unyielding. Every day was a battle for survival, and Mara had long since stopped counting the days. She'd learned how to read the wind in the shifting sand, how to judge the stars when the power in her survival kit failed, and how to ration her last scraps of food until her body screamed for sustenance. Mara wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and took another step. Her muscles ached, but she refused to stop. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun setting low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks. She couldn't afford to rest, not yet. She needed to find something, anything, that could give her the edge she was desperately searching for. The ground beneath her feet trembled. Not from the wind, not from a passing storm. It was a deep vibration, a low hum that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. Mara stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She had felt it before, but never this strongly. She crouched, listening. The hum resonated through the ground, vibrating her bones. Slowly, carefully, she crouched down, pressing her palm against the cracked earth. The vibrations were unmistakable now, a rhythmic pulsing, almost as if the planet itself was alive. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath. There were no seismic activities in the area. No tectonic plate shifting. Nothing natural that could explain this. Mara stood and adjusted the strap of her pack. She needed to find the source of the vibration. This could be her chance, her way off this hellhole, if she could just figure out what was going on. She set her jaw, resolute, and began walking towards the epicenter of the tremor. The journey took longer than expected, the terrain rougher than she remembered. Jagged rock formations loomed like blackened teeth, the dead remnants of some long-forgotten cataclysm. The hum seemed to grow louder with each step, and the ground pulsed beneath her, pushing back against her boots as though trying to pull her into its depths. Finally, she reached a ravine that had been carved into the landscape by centuries of erosion. At the base of it, partially obscured by dust and debris, lay a series of rocks, arranged in a way that suggested some kind of unnatural formation. The hum was coming from beneath these rocks. Mara felt her pulse quicken. Whatever this was, it was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. She dropped to her knees, brushing away the dirt and debris with her hands. Her heart pounded in her chest as she unearthed a strange object, a stone-like structure, smooth and black, embedded in the ground. It shimmered faintly in the dim light, as if the surface was alive, shifting. The hum was coming from it, the vibrations stronger now, sending a shiver down her spine. Mara's fingers traced the surface of the stone, and she gasped as the vibrations suddenly ceased. The air around her seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the stone shifted. A low, metallic groan echoed from beneath the surface, and a soft glow emanated from the cracks in the earth. The object in front of her opened, revealing a dark cavity within. She leaned in, squinting, her heart racing. Inside, there was something, a seed, perhaps, or an artifact. It pulsed with an inner light, vibrant and alive. It was then that she realized, the planet was changing. Something was awakening beneath the surface. Mara pulled back, a mixture of awe and fear rising in her chest. She was no longer alone on this planet. She had never been truly alone. Her mind raced. The Union had abandoned her here, thinking she was a lost cause. But this was a discovery. A game changer. Whatever this energy source was, it could give her the power to survive, maybe even escape. But what would it do to her? What would it do to the planet? She reached for the small data pad on her belt, the one piece of tech still functioning. A map of the planet appeared on the screen, showing her position relative to the wreckage site. There was no indication of any similar anomalies in the immediate area. This was unique. She had found something. Now, she had to decide what to do with it. A sudden thought crossed her mind: if the planet was changing, if it was becoming something more than just a graveyard, then maybe she wasn't the only one who had noticed. The Union wouldn't let this go unnoticed. They'd send a fleet to investigate. They would send someone to wipe this out. Mara stood up quickly, her muscles tense. There was no time to waste. The discovery had just made her an even bigger target than before. She took a deep breath, staring down at the glowing artifact. It was pulsing with energy now, like it had a life of its own. She had to harness it. But first, she needed to survive long enough to figure out what it was. The dead planet wasn't dead anymore. And neither was she. With one last glance at the glowing stone, Mara turned and began the long trek back to the wreckage. There was a fight coming, and this time, she wasn't just going to survive. She was going to make them regret ever thinking she was nothing more than an expendable piece of the Union's game. She had just found her weapon. And the world, it seemed, was just waking up. The days bled together on Xara 7. After the discovery in the ravine, Mara's sense of time became unreliable, a blur of action, fear, and calculation. The energy beneath the planet's surface hadn't just changed the land, it had begun to change her. The strange artifact she'd uncovered pulsed through her like a second heartbeat, growing stronger every day, fueling her mind, her body, with an intensity she couldn't fully comprehend. But for now, that power was a secret she would keep to herself. Survival was still the immediate concern. The Union had sent her here to die, but Mara wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. There were still other prisoners scattered across the planet. Some had survived for years, scavenging what they could, fighting each other for resources. Many had lost hope long ago. But Mara had something they didn't: knowledge of the planet's secret, a knowledge that could change everything. Mara had started small. She ventured into the wilderness each day, scouting, gathering, and assessing what was left of the wreckage around her. She found a few others along the way: scavengers, rogues, and soldiers who had been left behind after failed attempts at escape. They were barely hanging on, much like herself. Her first encounter had been with a man named Brax. He had once been a soldier, a former member of the Union's forces, but now he was just another exile, his uniform worn and faded, his eyes haunted by a past he couldn't escape. Mara had found him in a dilapidated shelter, sitting in silence as he stripped rust from metal scrap. "You're not dead yet," she had said, stepping into the small enclave. Brax looked up, his face gaunt and tired. "You're a new face. Exiled or just lost?" Mara didn't hesitate. "Exiled. But I'm not dying here." He hadn't said much more after that, only nodding grimly. He wasn't interested in talking. But the way he looked at her, there was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't as ready to give up as most. Days passed before she found more. A woman named Xara, a scientist, originally sent to Xara 7 to study the toxic environment for the Union. She had been part of a failed mission to terraform the planet. When the terraforming failed, she had been left behind, an afterthought. Xara was wary of Mara at first, but Mara's persistence won her over. "We've been forgotten," Xara said one evening as they sat by the remnants of an old fire. "The Union doesn't care. They just throw people out here and expect them to die. No weapons, no supplies, nothing. Then we take them back," Mara replied. Her voice was firm, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The idea of rebellion was strange at first. Mara had no illusions about the odds, but what they had now was something the Union had never counted on: a planet that was no longer as dead as it had seemed. The strange energy Mara had discovered wasn't just a curiosity, it was a resource, a weapon in its own right. And if it could transform the land, perhaps it could transform them. The next few weeks were spent in secret. Mara had no time to waste. She trained those who had the will to fight, teaching them basic tactics, survival skills, and how to harness the rudimentary weapons she could scavenge from the wreckage. She started small, attacking Union-supplied drones, hitting their patrols, doing everything she could to weaken their hold on the planet. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as they gathered in the shelter, Brax looked at Mara with a new kind of respect. "You've got a fire inside you," he said. "I've seen men like you before, leaders. You've got them listening." "Listening is just the beginning," Mara replied, sharpening a rusted knife on a stone. "Now we need to make them fear us." Her words were cold, but the fire in her eyes was undeniable. There was something about Mara that drew people in, her relentless will, her conviction that this planet wasn't a death sentence. It was a chance. A chance for something bigger than survival. A few days later, Mara and Brax were on a mission to scout a Union outpost a few kilometers away. As they approached, the sight of it made her stop in her tracks. It was a small base, automated mostly, but heavily guarded by drones. These outposts were typically used for reconnaissance, a way to keep an eye on the planet and the few survivors who remained. Mara knew taking it out wouldn't be easy, but it would send a message. It wasn't just a symbol of resistance, it was an opportunity to gain weapons and supplies. "Wait for my signal," Mara said as she crouched behind a boulder, studying the outpost through a pair of binoculars. Brax nodded. "You've got a plan?" "Always." Mara's voice was low, almost a whisper. The night was their ally. They moved swiftly, silently, with the shadows as their cover. As they approached the edge of the outpost, Mara could feel the strange pulse from the planet growing stronger. She wasn't sure if it was the artifact itself or something more, but she felt it coursing through her, sharpening her focus, heightening her senses. Mara's fingers twitched around the makeshift grenade she had fashioned from salvaged parts. She had no formal training in explosives, but necessity had turned her into a quick study. She slipped out from behind the rocks, moving quickly and with precision, and tossed the grenade toward the center of the outpost. The explosion was a deafening roar, sending drones scattering in every direction. "Now!" Mara shouted, charging forward, her rifle raised and ready. Brax was at her side instantly, his gun raised as they rushed into the fray. The Union drones fired, but Mara was faster, more precise. Her movements were fluid, guided by something primal, something in her blood that had awakened with the planet itself. She felt the pull of the energy, urging her forward, giving her strength she hadn't known she had. The skirmish lasted mere minutes, but it was enough. The outpost was in flames, the remaining drones lying in pieces. Mara and Brax stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily but triumphant. "That's how it's done," Mara said, her voice taut with exhilaration. Brax chuckled darkly. "You weren't kidding when you said you were going to make them fear us." "We're just getting started," Mara replied, her eyes already scanning the horizon. She could feel it, there was more to come. The Union would send reinforcements. But they wouldn't know what hit them. As they gathered the supplies from the wreckage, Mara looked out over the horizon, her mind racing. The rebellion was small, nothing more than a spark. But sparks could grow into flames, and flames could burn down empires. Mara wasn't just going to survive on this planet, she was going to make it her own. And the Union would learn the hard way that there was no such thing as a dead planet. Not anymore. Mara stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the first light of dawn touched the barren landscape of Xara 7. The fires of the previous night still smoldered in the distance, remnants of the Union outpost they had destroyed. Her breath fogged the cold morning air as she tightened the straps on her gear, her mind already turning to the next step in their war. They had won a small victory, but it was only the beginning. The rebellion was small, just a handful of survivors, but they had something now, something that the Union hadn't anticipated. The planet itself was changing, evolving. The energy beneath the surface was more than a mere oddity. It was a force that could shift the balance of power, a force they could use. Brax walked up behind her, his heavy footsteps soft in the dust. "You're thinking too much, Kessler," he said, his voice low but familiar. "We've hit one outpost. The Union won't just let that slide." "I know," Mara said without turning. "But it's not just about hitting them back. It's about proving we can hit them where it hurts. Like stealing their supplies and blowing up their equipment." Brax smirked, crossing his arms. Mara's lips twitched in response. "Exactly. But we need more. A bigger target. A way to make them see this planet isn't dead. We need to send them a message they can't ignore." Brax didn't reply right away. He knew Mara's mind worked fast, and he had learned to trust her instincts. But still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things were moving too fast. Xara 7 was still a harsh, unforgiving place, and while Mara's new energy, whatever it was, had given them an edge, it wasn't enough to change the odds entirely. "We need more fighters," Mara said after a long pause. "If we want to win this, we need to stop playing their game and start controlling the battlefield." Brax's gaze softened. He had known Mara long enough to recognize when she was serious. "You think they'll come for us soon?" "I don't think it," Mara replied, her eyes hardening with resolve. "I know it. They'll come for us the moment they get wind of what we've done. And when they do, we'll be ready." Over the next few days, Mara focused on rallying more survivors. It wasn't easy. The exiles were scattered, and many had lost all faith in any kind of resistance. Some had grown too weak to even attempt escape, others were simply too broken to care. But Mara was a force of nature, relentless in her pursuit of hope. She found those who still had a spark, those who were desperate enough to fight and angry enough to trust her. Slowly, the rebellion grew. In a small valley, hidden from the Union's surveillance systems, they built their camp. The fires of the first night's victory were the foundation of something bigger, and Mara made sure every member of their new force knew it. They trained by day, skirmished by night, learning how to navigate the planet's strange energies, how to use the power of the land to their advantage. The planet itself was beginning to yield to them in ways Mara had never expected. "You feel it too, don't you?" Mira asked, catching Mara's eye as she worked alongside the others, calibrating a new makeshift weapon. Mara nodded, her senses sharpened, more attuned to the planet than she had ever been. "It's like the planet is alive now. I can feel it in my bones. The pulse, the energy. It's growing stronger." Mira looked around cautiously, lowering her voice. "What if this is the planet changing us, Mara? What if it's not just the Union we need to worry about?" The thought hadn't escaped Mara. The energy was unpredictable, and it seemed to be affecting everyone who came into contact with it. Some of the rebels had shown signs of increased strength, heightened reflexes, and a strange clarity of mind. Others were more erratic, frenzied, almost violent. Mara's eyes darkened. "We take it as it comes. We can't afford to think about what might happen. We need to survive long enough to make sure they understand we're not a threat they can ignore." Before Nira could respond, a shout rang out from the camp's perimeter. Mara's hand went to the sidearm strapped to her waist as she dashed toward the sound. "What is it?" Mara called as she arrived at the edge of the camp, where one of the sentries, a young exiled soldier named Ray, was pointing into the distance. "Union ships," Ray gasped, eyes wide with panic. "They've landed." Mara's heart clenched. The Union hadn't wasted any time. She quickly assessed the situation. The Union had sent an entire battalion, complete with ground forces and a fleet of ships. They were here to take back control. To wipe them out. "There's no time to hide," Mara said, her voice steady. "Prepare for an assault. Brax, take the east side. Nira, Ray, you're with me on the west. We'll set up traps along the way." Brax nodded, his face grim. "You think we can hold them off?" "We don't need to hold them off," Mara said, her voice cold and focused. "We need to make them believe they're facing something they can't fight. If we can disrupt their advance, we'll force them to rethink their strategy." Mara's mind raced, formulating a plan. The terrain of Xara 7 was unforgiving, but it could also be an advantage. She had learned the planet's rhythms, its pulses. She could use the strange energy to manipulate their path, to lead them into traps. But the time for preparation was over. They would fight now. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the Union forces moved in. The ships overhead cast long shadows across the valley, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. But Mara didn't flinch. She had spent too long running to let fear take over now. The energy from the planet hummed in her chest, urging her forward. She signaled to the others. "On my mark," she said, her voice a low growl. "We take them down." The first Union patrol came into view, and Mara's heart surged. They were close now, within striking distance. She could feel the pulse of the planet beneath her feet, and as the first Union soldier crossed into the trap zone, she let it loose. The earth trembled violently, and a series of explosions detonated along the enemy's line. The soldiers stumbled, disoriented, caught off guard. Mara dove into the chaos, her instinct sharp, her body moving with fluid precision. She was faster than she had ever been, her movements controlled by something deeper than will. She shot, she struck, and she led her people forward into the fray, each step taken with the knowledge that the planet, and the power they had awakened, was on their side. As the battle raged on, Mara could feel it, the Union was faltering. The planet's energy was shifting the tide in their favor. And for the first time since she had been abandoned here, Mara knew one thing for certain: they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win.